What would you do if a desperate stranger offered you the last bite of food they had to their name? Carolyn Sterling was worth $4 billion. But on a freezing November night, it was a penniless, single father who saved her life. This is a story of ultimate deception, heartbreaking sacrifice, and a twist that changed 2 lives forever. Caroline Sterling sat at the head of a 50-foot mahogany conference table in downtown Chicago, her expression as unyielding as the reinforced glass overlooking the skyline. At 32, she was the sole heir and CEO of Sterling Hospitality and Real Estate, a conglomerate that devoured struggling neighborhoods and replaced them with luxury high-rises. She wore a bespoke Tom Ford suit that cost more than most people made in 6 months. Yet she had never felt more impoverished in spirit. The Oakwood District acquisition is proceeding flawlessly. Caroline, Nathaniel Reed, her chief operating officer, said with a slick, practiced smile. He clicked his laser pointer at a projection, mapping out a historic, albeit crumbling, sector of the city. The current residents are practically begging to be bought out. We're offering them pennies on the dollar, and they're taking it. The demolition permits are already expedited. Caroline narrowed her eyes. Nathaniel was ruthless, a trait her late father had admired, but Caroline had always possessed a nagging intuition. Are they really begging to leave? Nathaniel. Or are we squeezing them out through proxy landlords raising the rent? Nathaniel chuckled, adjusting his silk tie. Business is business. Caroline, the board expects a 30% profit margin by Q3. Don't tell me you're getting soft. She wasn't getting soft. She was getting suspicious. For months, she had been receiving anonymous letters forwarded to her private office, handwritten, desperate pleas from Oakwood residents claiming they were being threatened. Their heating shut off in the dead of winter, forced to sign predatory NDAs. Nathaniel had dismissed them as the whining of squatters, but the sheer volume of the letters gnawed at her. She was entirely surrounded by sycophants, yes-men, and corporate sharks. If she wanted the truth about Oakwood, she couldn't rely on reports generated by the very men profiting from its destruction. She had to see it for herself. That weekend, Caroline did something drastic. She dismissed her private security detail, locked her black titanium Amex in a wall safe, and drove an untraceable, beat-up sedan to the outskirts of the Oakwood district. She rented a suffocatingly small, damp room above a laundromat under the name Carly Stevens. She swapped her designer wardrobe for faded jeans, scuffed sneakers, and a cheap, oversized winter coat from a thrift store. Looking in the mirror, stripped of her blowout and makeup, her hair pulled into a messy claw clip, she was unrecognizable. The untouchable billionaire had vanished. To blend in, she needed a vantage point. She walked into the Copper Kettle, a greasy, round-the-clock diner situated perfectly in the heart of the district slated for demolition. The owner, an exhausted, chain-smoking woman named Beatrice, looked Caroline up and down. "You got experience, sweetheart," Beatrice rasped, wiping down a sticky counter with a grey rag. "Enough to hustle," Caroline lied smoothly. "And I need the cash. Minimum wage, plus whatever tips these cheapskates leave. Shift starts at 4 p.m., ends at 2 a.m. Drop a plate. It comes out of your check." The first 3 days nearly broke her. Caroline, accustomed to having her schedule managed down to the minute by 3 different assistants, was utterly unprepared for the physical agony of a 10-hour waitressing shift. The soles of her feet burned as if walking on hot coals. Her lower back throbbed from carrying heavy trays of meatloaf and scalding coffee. She was yelled at by impatient truck drivers, stiffed on tips by rowdy teenagers, and berated by Beatrice for pouring soup too slowly. But the physical pain paled in comparison to the emotional revelation. Here, stripped of her power, she was invisible. Worse, she was less than human to the people who walked through the door. On her fourth night, a Tuesday, a group of businessmen in tailored suits, men who looked exactly like her own executives, came in. When Caroline accidentally spilled a drop of ice water on one man's leather briefcase, he didn't just complain, he humiliated her. "Are you completely incompetent?" he barked, his voice carrying across the diner. "Do you know how much this leather costs? It's worth more than your life, you stupid girl. Get out of my sight and get me a manager." Beatrice rushed over, apologizing profusely, and immediately yanked Caroline into the back kitchen. "You're off the floor. Carly, I'm docking your pay for their meal, and if you mess up again, you're on the street." Caroline retreated to the cramped employee break room, her hands shaking with a toxic mix of rage and shock. She reached for her locker to grab her burner phone. She needed to call her driver. She was done. The experiment was over. She would buy the diner tomorrow just to fire everyone in it. But when she opened the rusted metal door, her stomach dropped. The locker was empty. Her cheap purse, containing her burner phone, her apartment keys, and the $40 she had earned in tips, was gone. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced her chest. For the first time in her life, Caroline Sterling was truly, terrifyingly helpless. The November wind was unforgiving, slicing through the thin fabric of Caroline's thrift store coat like razor blades. Kicked out of the diner by Beatrice until her next shift, and locked out of her miserable rented room. She had nowhere to go. She couldn't call Nathaniel or her security chief. She didn't even remember their direct phone numbers, accustomed to just pressing a speed dial button on a phone she no longer possessed. She huddled in the dark, damp alleyway behind the copper kettle, sitting on a milk crate next to the roaring exhaust vent, just to steal a fraction of its heat. It was 1 a.m. Freezing rain began to drizzle, soaking her hair and chilling her to the bone. Her stomach cramped violently. In the chaos of her shift, she hadn't eaten anything since a stale piece of toast 12 hours ago. Tears of absolute frustration welled in her eyes. The great Caroline Sterling, a woman who commanded boardrooms and dictated the skyline of Chicago, was reduced to a shivering, starving mess in a trash-strewn alley. She pulled her knees to her chest, burying her face in her arms, crying silent, bitter tears. "Hey!" The voice was deep, cautious, and rough with exhaustion. Caroline flinched, instinctively pulling away, terrified. Standing a few feet away was a man in heavily stained Carhartt work pants, a faded flannel shirt, and a worn-out beanie. He looked to be in his mid-30s, with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of chronic sleep deprivation. His hands were calloused and covered in brick dust. "I don't have any money," Caroline choked out, her voice trembling. "Leave me alone." The man didn't step closer. Instead, he raised his hands gently to show he wasn't a threat. "I'm not looking for money. I heard you crying. It's too cold to be sitting out here. You'll catch pneumonia. My bag was stolen," she confessed, the vulnerability slipping out before she could stop it. "I have nowhere to go. I'm locked out." The man sighed, a heavy, tired sound. He looked down at the brown paper bag in his hands, then back at her. He took a hesitant step forward and held it out. "Here," he said. Caroline stared at the bag. "What is it?" "It's half a turkey sandwich "And a thermos of hot tea," he replied softly. "I'm on my meal break from the construction site down the block." "Take it." Caroline hesitated, her pride warring with her primal hunger. "I can't take your dinner. What will you eat?" A sad smile touched the corners of his mouth. "I had a big lunch. I'm fine, honestly. Take it before you freeze." She reached out with shaking hands and took the bag. The warmth of the thermos radiated through the paper, feeling like heaven against her icy skin. She unscrewed the lid and took a sip of the sweet, cheap black tea. It was the best thing she had ever tasted. She tore into the sandwich, eating with a ferocity that surprised her. The man watched her for a moment before leaning against the brick wall opposite her. "I'm Oliver," he offered. "Oliver Hayes." "Carly," she lied, swallowing hard. "Thank you, Oliver. You didn't have to do this. It's a rough city. Carly, we have to look out for each other, especially around here. Things are getting worse." He rubbed his face, smearing a streak of dirt across his cheek. "My shift doesn't end until 6 a.m. You can sit in my truck if you want. It's unlocked and the heater works. It's safer than the alley." Caroline paused. A billionaire getting into a stranger's truck in an alleyway was a recipe for disaster. But looking into Oliver's eyes, she saw no malice, only profound, bone-deep exhaustion, and a quiet kindness. "Why are you working at 1 a.m.? she asked, trying to deflect from his offer. Oliver let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Non-union night crew. It pays a little extra under the table. I need every cent I can get right now. My daughter, Lily. She's 6. She's staying with my neighbor tonight." He paused, his expression darkening. "My wife passed away 2 years ago. Ovarian cancer. The medical bills. Well, they took everything we had. And now, the corporate vultures are circling." Caroline's blood ran cold. She stopped chewing. "Corporate vultures. Sterling Holdings." Oliver spat the name like a curse. Some billionaire heiress who's never worked a day in her life decided this neighborhood would look better as a bunch of glass condos. They bought out my building last month through some shell company. They jacked the rent up by 400% to force us out. If I don't come up with $3,000 by Friday, Lily and I are on the street. Caroline felt as if the air had been violently sucked from her lungs. The turkey sandwich turned to ash in her mouth. $3,000? To her, it was the cost of a casual dinner in Paris. To Oliver, it was the difference between keeping a roof over his grieving child's head and homelessness. And it was her company doing it. It was her signature on the acquisition documents. Nathaniel had lied to her face, and she had blindly signed the papers, destroying lives without a second thought. I had no idea," Caroline whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Why would you?" Oliver replied kindly, misunderstanding her shock. "You're just trying to survive out here. Same as me. Those people in the high rises, the Caroline Sterlings of the world, they don't see us as human beings. We're just numbers on a spreadsheet, inconveniences in their way." He pushed himself off the brick wall and pulled a set of keys from his pocket. He detached a single silver key and tossed it to her. She caught it clumsily. "That's for the truck. It's the blue Ford parked by the street lamp on 4th. Go get warm. Carly, lock the doors. I'll come get you when my shift is done, and we'll figure out how to get you a new ID." Before she could protest, before she could confess the horrifying truth of who she was, Oliver turned and walked back toward the roar of the construction site, leaving her alone in the dark. Caroline looked down at the half-eaten sandwich in her lap. The man had lied to her. He hadn't had a big lunch. His stomach had audibly growled while he was standing there. He had given her his only meal, his only source of warmth, and the safety of his vehicle, while she was the very monster actively ruining his life, sitting in the freezing alley, grasping the keys of a desperate, generous man. Caroline Sterling made a silent, ferocious vow. She was going to tear her own company apart from the inside out. Caroline awoke to the harsh, grey light of a Chicago dawn filtering through the frosted windows of the Ford pickup. Her body ached from sleeping upright, but the truck's cabin had kept her alive. She looked out the window and saw Oliver walking toward the vehicle, his shoulders slumped in a posture of utter defeat. He held 2 styrofoam cups of coffee. She rolled down the window as he approached. "Morning." "Carly," he said, handing her a cup. His hands were raw and blistered. "It's just black. Couldn't afford sugar this morning. I'm heading to my apartment to get Lily. The landlord sent a notice yesterday. If we aren't out by noon today. They're calling the Cook County Sheriff to throw our things onto the street." Caroline took the coffee, the heat scalding her numb fingers. "Oliver, you said you needed $3,000 by Friday. Today is Wednesday." "They expedited it," he said, staring at the cracked pavement. "Apex Holdings. The shell company Sterling is using. They sent a crew yesterday to shut off the water main to the whole building. They're trying to freeze us out early. I have to get Lily to my sister's place in Evanston. And then... I don't know." He forced a brave, agonizing smile. "But I'll drop you off at a shelter first, or a police station if you want to report your stolen bag." Caroline's heart hammered against her ribs. Nathaniel wasn't just bending the rules. He was breaking the law, utilizing illegal lockouts and utility shutoffs to terrorize families, and he was doing it under her family's legacy. "You don't need to drop me anywhere." "Oliver," Caroline said, her voice finding the steely resonance that usually commanded boardrooms. "I have a friend I can call, but I need you to promise me something. Do not leave your apartment at noon. Stall them." Oliver looked at her, confused by the sudden shift in her demeanor. The shivering, broken girl from the alley was gone. "Stall the sheriff's department, Carly. That's how you get arrested." "Just trust me," she pleaded, looking him dead in the eye. "You gave me your only meal last night. Let me help you today. Buy me 3 hours." Before he could argue, Caroline opened the door, stepped into the biting wind, and began to run. She didn't go to the police. She ran 12 blocks to the imposing glass facade of the J.P. Morgan Chase Tower in the financial district. The security guards initially blocked the disheveled, frantic woman in a dirty thrift store coat. But Caroline knew the bank's protocols. She demanded to see Richard Richard Sterling, her uncle's old associate, but he had retired. She demanded to see William Bradley, the Vice President of Private Wealth Management. "Tell him Caroline Sterling is downstairs, and if he doesn't come down here in exactly 60 seconds, I will pull my entire $4 billion portfolio from this institution by lunch." She snapped at the bewildered receptionist. Less than 2 minutes later, a pale, sweating William Bradley rushed into the lobby. "Ms. Sterling, good God, what happened to you?" "I need a secure room, a burner laptop, a new iPhone, and a direct line to my chief of security, David Miller, right now." Within the hour, Caroline was operating out of a mahogany-paneled conference room at the bank, She bypassed her corporate servers, using her highest-level biometric clearances to dig directly into the financial underbelly of Sterling Hospitality. She pulled up the ledgers for the Oakwood District acquisition. What she found made her physically sick. Nathaniel Reed hadn't just been cutting corners. He was running a massive embezzlement ring. The board had approved $50 million for fair market buyouts in Oakwood. Nathaniel had created Apex Holdings as a ghost entity. He was using Apex to buy the properties for literal pennies by terrorizing the residents with illegal evictions and forged NDAs. Then, Apex, which Nathaniel secretly owned, was selling the land back to Sterling Hospitality at a wildly inflated premium. He was pocketing tens of millions of dollars of her company's money while destroying the lives of people like Oliver. "David," Caroline said, her phone pressed to her ear as her fingers flew across the keyboard. "Ms. Sterling, where have you been?" Her head of security barked, sounding frantic. "We've had a tactical team looking for you for 4 days. I need you to assemble the private security detail, all of them, and get Chief Inspector Riley from the Chicago PD Financial Crimes Unit on the line," Caroline commanded. "We are going to the Oakwood District, and David, bring my lawyers." At 11:45 a.m., the atmosphere outside Oliver's crumbling brick apartment building was thick with tension. A yellow bulldozer sat idling ominously at the end of the street. 6 large men in cheap suits, thugs hired by Apex Holdings, stood by the front door, wielding crowbars and eviction notices. Inside his freezing, waterless apartment, Oliver held his 6-year-old daughter, Lily, tightly to his chest. She was bundled in 3 layers of sweaters, crying softly. He had barricaded the door with a heavy oak dresser, but he knew it wouldn't hold against 6 men. He felt like a failure. He had worked his fingers to the bone, mourned his wife, and tried to be a good father. Yet here he was, about to be thrown onto the freezing concrete. "It's okay, baby," Oliver whispered, kissing the top of Lily's head, his voice cracking. "Daddy's got you. We're going to play a game. Okay, we're going to go on a camping trip to Auntie's house." A heavy fist pounded on the door, shaking the frame. "Time's up! Hayes!" A gruff voice shouted from the hallway. "Open the door or we take it off the hinges." Oliver closed his eyes, bracing for the impact. The door groaned as a crowbar was wedged into the jamb. Wood splintered. Suddenly, the horrific screeching of the wood stopped. Outside, the idling bulldozer abruptly killed its engine. The shouting in the hallway ceased, replaced by a strange, heavy silence, followed by the sound of heavy combat boots rushing up the stairs. "Chicago Police Department, drop the weapons. Hands on the wall. Right now." Oliver gasped, pulling Lily back as the heavy oak door was gently pushed open. He expected to see the corrupt sheriff's deputies Nathaniel usually hired. Instead, he saw a wall of uniformed police officers handcuffing the thugs. "Mr. Hayes," a calm, authoritative voice called out. The crowd of officers parted. Walking through the splintered doorway was a woman. She was flanked by a team of men in immaculate, dark security suits. She wore a tailored black cashmere coat, her hair sleek and perfectly styled, her posture radiating absolute, terrifying authority. Oliver blinked, his jaw dropping. He recognized those eyes. He recognized the bone structure. But the dirty, freezing waitressing clothes were gone, replaced by an aura of billions of dollars. "Carly," he breathed out, completely bewildered. "It's Caroline, actually," she said, stepping into the freezing apartment. Her eyes softened as she looked at him and the terrified little girl clinging to his leg. Caroline Sterling. Oliver felt the blood drain from his face. He stumbled backward, pulling Lily behind him. You're her. You're the one doing this to us. You lied to me. The betrayal stung worse than the freezing air. He had given this woman his last scrap of food, and she was the billionaire orchestrating his ruin. I didn't know. Oliver, Caroline said, her voice shaking slightly, shedding the corporate armor. I swear to you on my life, I didn't know what was happening down here. But I know now. Footsteps echoed heavily in the hallway. 2 police officers marched a pale, furious Nathaniel Reed into the room in handcuffs. He had been intercepted at his luxury Gold Coast condo, attempting to board a helicopter to O'Hare. Caroline, this is a misunderstanding, Nathaniel shouted, sweating profusely despite the cold. These people are squatters. I was protecting your assets. You can't do this to me. I built this quarter's margins. Caroline turned to him, her expression turning into absolute ice. You embezzled $42 million through Apex Holdings. Nathaniel, you authorized illegal utility shutoffs, forged eviction documents, and intimidated citizens. I've turned all the ledgers over to the FBI. You aren't just fired. You are going to federal prison for a very, very long time. She nodded to the officers, who dragged a screaming, protesting Nathaniel down the stairs. Caroline turned back to Oliver. The shock in the room was palpable. She pulled a thick, official-looking document from her coat pocket and placed it gently on the small kitchen table. "What is that?" Oliver asked, his voice still trembling. "The deed to this building," Caroline said. "I bought it back from Apex Holdings this morning, and I'm transferring ownership to a trust, a tenant-run trust." She looked around the dilapidated room, her heart aching for the suffering her negligence had caused. "I am halting the entire Oakwood demolition project. We are going to renovate these buildings, not destroy them. And I am launching a community oversight board to make sure my company never does this again." Oliver stared at her, unable to process the magnitude of what she was saying. "Why? Because last night I was freezing, starving, and invisible," Caroline said softly, stepping closer. "And a man who had nothing, a man my company was actively destroying, offered me his last bite of food and the keys to his truck to keep me safe. You saved my life, Oliver. It's time I saved yours." She crouched down to Lily's eye level, offering a warm, genuine smile. "Hi, Lily. I'm Caroline. Your dad is a very good man." She stood back up, looking at Oliver. "My chief operating officer position is currently vacant. I need someone who actually understands construction, someone who knows the value of hard work, and most importantly, someone with a conscience. The starting salary is 7 figures. If you want the job, my lawyers can draft the contract today." Oliver's knees finally gave out. He sank into one of the rickety kitchen chairs, burying his face in his calloused hands as tears of pure relief streamed down his face. The crushing, suffocating weight of poverty, the fear of losing his daughter, the grief of the past 2 years, it all shattered in an instant. Caroline placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "But first," she said, a small, genuine smile playing on her lips, "I owe you a turkey sandwich." 6 months later, the Oakwood district was unrecognizable, not because it had been replaced by glass towers, but because it had been reborn. Fresh paint, repaired roofs, and thriving small businesses lined the streets. The community board, led by the newly appointed COO Oliver Hayes, ensured that progress never came at the expense of the people. Caroline Sterling sat in the newly renovated Copper Kettle Diner, She wasn't wearing a disguise. She wore her Tom Ford suit, sipping hot black tea. Across from her sat Oliver and Lily, laughing over a plate of pancakes. Caroline looked out the window at the bustling neighborhood. She had inherited a billion-dollar empire from her father, but it took a freezing night in an alley and a desperately kind stranger to teach her what true wealth actually looked like. Did Caroline's ultimate sacrifice and Oliver's incredible kindness touch your heart? Sometimes, the greatest wealth isn't found in bank accounts, but in the humanity we show each other in our darkest moments. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that good people still exist, and subscribe for more dramatic, life-changing stories.